Upon discovering my spouse's infidelity, it is incredibly challenging to remain composed. Yet it is said that it is essential to transform that rage into something beneficial. Thus, I am here to recount my experience, with the intention that it may act as a warning and potentially provide a form of emotional cleansing. Relax, inhale deeply, and let us immerse ourselves in a tale of deception and treachery. Let us refer to my wife, who is 26 years of age, as Linda, and the other individual, a man who I considered a friend, also 27 years old, as Rick. Here is a snippet of our history. Our encounter was not by chance. It was deliberately arranged by mutual acquaintances at a wedding celebration where I was 22 years old, and she was the radiant bridesmaid. Our friends had thoughtfully placed us next to each other, with the hope that we would connect, and they were spot on. Linda was exceptionally attractive, and our first conversation unveiled a mutual sense of humor and shared interests that instantly bonded us. The night continued with easy conversation, a shared meal, and eventually, we became engrossed in dancing as the evening wore on, saturated with beverages and mirth. We exchanged an impromptu kiss in the midst of the dance floor. This moment was not overlooked. Our friends, who had played the role of matchmakers, were delighted with their accomplishment and approached us to jest about the evident chemistry between us. We dismissed their remarks, relishing the remainder of the night in a state of blissful ignorance of the growing emotions. Although we parted ways without exchanging numbers, Linda reached out to me a week later with a text suggesting a coffee meetup. I was elated, promptly agreed, and what started as a casual date swiftly transformed into a deep, committed relationship. Our journey from dating to a serious relationship was smooth, marked by affection and understanding. Though not without the occasional petty argument, nothing ever seemed too serious. Until I proposed 2 years into our relationship, and we married a year after that proposal. However, as we neared our first wedding anniversary, subtle changes began to unsettle me. Linda became increasingly protective of her privacy. Her nights out with girlfriends multiplied, and our once vibrant intimacy dwindled to nothing. I voiced my concerns multiple times, only to be dismissed as being overly insecure or paranoid. Her indifference to my feelings grew, chilling the warmth between us. I stopped the affectionate goodbye kisses each morning, and our conversations dwindled to nothing beyond necessary interactions. One restless night, driven by a nagging suspicion, I decided to investigate further. Her phone revealed nothing incriminating, which led me to search her car, where I discovered a hidden second phone. The betrayal hit me like a wave. I meticulously went through every message, documenting the evidence of her infidelity. I spent the rest of that night researching divorce lawyers online, finding one with the expertise I needed. My discovery continued to haunt me the next day, and in a moment of impulse to confront the other man, I dialed the number, only to see Rick's name flash as the contact. The realization that my wife had cheated on me with one of my closest friends unleashed a storm of rage within me. I was yelling and cursing alone in my office when Linda appeared at the door, overwhelmed by anger. All I managed was to tell her to get the hell out. She shut the door and retreated to our bedroom. I've never been one to raise my voice or curse at Linda, but that day, I was a silent storm, seething and staring blankly at the wall in my office. Eventually, I reached out to one of my buddies, Tom, from the wedding. His voice had a hint of concern as soon as I mentioned needing a drink. He could tell something was off. Without spilling the beans over the phone, I grabbed the damning printouts and headed to the bar. I got there first, ordered 4 shots of Jack and a beer, and was nursing the last shot when Tom showed up. He didn't waste any time asking what was up. I laid it out plain and simple. Linda was cheating on me. The shock hit him hard, and it only deepened when I revealed it was with Rick. Tom was the guy who'd introduced us, and all he could manage was a string of apologies. Rick and I weren't close, more like acquaintances who got along at gatherings. Nothing more. I made Tom promise to keep this under wraps, especially from his wife. If she asked, he was to say I was stressed about work. He agreed, and we spent the night drowning our sorrows, talking through everything until I called an Uber around 3 a.m. I hadn't looked at my phone all night. When I did, it was bombarded with missed calls and texts from Linda, all asking where I was and if I was okay. I got home to find her asleep on the couch. I went straight to our bedroom, too drained to deal with any of it. The next morning, She was somehow back in bed next to me. I dressed and left without a word, picked up my car, and threw myself into work to avoid thinking about anything else. I returned home late, around 10 p.m., to find Linda waiting up, saying she had made dinner. I declined and headed straight to bed, but she followed, pestering me about what was wrong. My patience wore thin, and I finally snapped, telling her I just wanted to sleep and to leave me alone. The next morning, I got an email from the lawyer I had contacted. We set up a meeting for later that day. As I was leaving the house, Linda tried again, this time with breakfast and an attempt at conversation. She remarked on how distant I'd become, pressing for answers. I brushed her off, saying work was just hectic, and reassured her it would all be over soon. After a quick bite, I headed out, telling my assistant I was meeting a client for lunch, just in case Linda called the office. The meeting with the lawyer went better than expected. I handed over all the evidence I had collected. He commended me for being thorough, especially since we lived in an at-fault state. This meant Linda couldn't claim much of my assets. It hadn't even crossed my mind. All I could focus on was ending the marriage swiftly. He advised retaining the evidence, but I requested copies instead, since I hadn't confronted Linda yet and didn't want to hear any of her excuses. The lawyer's assistant quickly made the copies for me. Curious, I asked when Linda would be served with the divorce papers. He estimated about 2 weeks. Thanking him, I left the office, resolved to confront Linda as soon as I got home. When I arrived, the house was empty. I called her. No answer. I called again. Still no response. Frustrated, I texted her bluntly, "I don't care if you're with Rick right now. Get home. We need to talk." Almost immediately, she called back, feigning ignorance about my urgent tone. I cut straight to the chase. "Get home now?" She showed up 15 minutes later, and I couldn't help but remark sarcastically, "Wow, 15 minutes. That's roughly the time it takes to get here from Rick's, isn't it?" She stared at me, dumbfounded. I waited for her to respond, but she remained silent. So I pressed on, challenging her denial and lies. As she became defensive and started hurling insults, I slammed my fist on the table to silence her, pulling out the copies of the evidence. I showed her the stack first, then laid out each printout one by one. She broke down, started crying, and began apologizing, claiming she still loved me. I scoffed at her sudden change of tone. "Honey, where's that fire you had a minute ago when you were so keen on belittling me?" As she attempted to approach and embrace me, apologizing profusely, I sternly warned her not to touch me. She desperately suggested making it up to me in any way I desired. Looking her straight in the eyes, I told her, "Sweetheart, I will never touch you again." Want to know who else has seen these messages and photos? My lawyer. "I'm filing for divorce now. Pack your things and get out of my house." That confrontation was 3 days ago, and I haven't heard from her since. Given the situation, I hope to avoid direct contact with Linda altogether. All communication with Linda was to go through my lawyer from now on. As for Rick, I found out he's engaged, and I feel obligated to inform his fiancée about what's been going on. When asked how I plan to reach out to her, considering Rick might be vigilant now, I've already thought it through. I've met her a few times before and have her contact number. I'll try reaching her via phone first. If that doesn't work, I'll drop by their place when I know he's at work and slip a note in her car, urging her to contact me. I'm determined not to let him off easy. This morning was about damage control. I've scheduled an appointment with my doctor to get tested for STDs, and that's happening in 2 days. I also reached out to my inner circle, my dad, and a few close friends. They've been incredibly supportive, offering advice and assistance, though I assured them I've got things under control. Next, I contacted Linda's family. I sent a message to her parents, expressing gratitude for their kindness over the years, but informed them that Linda and I are divorcing. I mentioned that I'd miss them, though in truth, their overbearing nature was something I won't regret leaving behind. I gave them space to process this and reach out if they had questions. The hardest message was to Linda's sister, with whom I shared a close friendship. I texted her, explaining the situation and expressing my regret that our relationship might change. I thanked her for always treating me like family and assured her of my support whenever she might need it. These conversations are just the beginning of redefining my relationships and taking control of my life post-divorce. After sending that message, Linda's parents quickly responded, expressing their shock and concern. Here's a summary of our conversation. Linda's parents asterisk, "We're so sorry to hear this. What happened? Why hasn't Linda mentioned anything to us?" Me asterisk, "Linda has been engaged in an affair for at least a year. I believe it started even before our wedding. I'm not sure why she hasn't reached out to you, but I think you should try contacting her. She's left our home, and I thought she might have gone to you." Linda's parents asterisk, "No, we haven't seen her. We'll call her right away. Thank you for letting us know. Are you certain she was having an affair?" Me asterisk, "Absolutely. I found their text messages." Linda's parents asterisk, "We're so sorry you're going through this. We'll try to get in touch with her and talk." After this exchange, I reached out to Jay's fiancée, which I thought might be more complicated. Perhaps Linda and Jay had devised some elaborate cover-up, but it seemed either she wasn't informed or they underestimated the situation. At 2 p.m., I texted her to ask if we could meet. She quickly agreed, and we decided to meet at a quaint, somewhat quirky coffee shop near her work at 2:30 p.m. I arrived early, ordered what turned out to be a less-than-great coffee, and waited. She arrived shortly after, got her coffee, and joined me. There was no easy way to break the news, so I came right out with it. "Jay has been cheating on you with my wife for over a year." Her shock was palpable. I explained that I had only discovered this a few days ago, amidst initiating my divorce and dealing with my own turmoil. She inquired about how I found out, so I summarized the ordeal, mentioning the detailed evidence I'd compiled in a binder. Curious, she asked to see the evidence. I handed her the binder, and she quietly leafed through the messages and pictures, tears starting to form. I reassured her that she could take the binder, whether to confront Jay directly or just to see if he would lie about it. Gratefully, she took it and left, looking understandably upset. The weight of these revelations has been crushing. Despite advice to stay sober and keep a level head, I need this week to myself to sit on my back porch, drink, smoke cigars, and lose myself in loud music. After this, I'll strive to regain my usual routine. On a practical note, I've packed up most of Linda's belongings, her clothes, jewelry, our wedding album, and all photos including hers. Everything's boxed up, ready for when she decides to retrieve them. I've made sure not to damage anything, apart from a few picture frames. With my doctor's appointment scheduled and my lawyer actively working on the divorce, I've done nearly everything that needs to be done. Linda's items occupy 90% of the boxes, and if she continues to keep her distance, this might turn out to be a remarkably smooth divorce process. Update asterisk, I've admittedly been wallowing in self-pity, indulging in a bit too much drinking. This is the first moment I feel somewhat sober since the whole ordeal began, and honestly, it's hard to articulate how I'm feeling. Numb might be the closest description. I mentioned that I had informed everyone important except Linda's sister, who I was quite close to, and didn't respond. That very night, after sharing the update, I continued drinking and eventually passed out on the back patio. I awoke to the aroma of breakfast cooking, and my initial thought was that Linda had returned, thinking that making breakfast could somehow compensate for her betrayal. Bracing myself for a confrontation, I jumped up, ready to unleash my anger, but to my surprise, it was Linda's sister, Wendy. Wendy didn't say much at first. Simply, she took my hand, led me to the table, and placed a plate in front of me. As I ate, she expressed her apologies. She shared that when Linda appeared at her house, she merely mentioned we were having temporary problems that would resolve soon. However, when I texted her about the divorce, Wendy confronted Linda, asking why the divorce was happening if things were supposedly fine. Linda broke down and confessed everything, although she tried to downplay the affair as a one-time mistake. I told Wendy that reconciliation with Linda was out of the question and advised her to inform Linda to seek legal representation if she hadn't already. Wendy clarified she wasn't here to advocate for her sister. She was here for me, valuing our friendship independently of her sister's actions. This reassurance lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. I had feared this mess would ruin our friendship. After expressing her support, Wendy and I shared a heartfelt hug. Wendy stayed with me for a couple of days, using the guest bedroom, as I prepared to leave for my cabin, a property I owned before my marriage and thus untouchable by Linda. I was gathering my hunting and fishing gear when Wendy asked if she could join me. Though I appreciated her company, I suggested she might want to check on her sister instead. She agreed, gave me a supportive hug, and left. I'm profoundly grateful for Wendy's support during this tumultuous time, and before anyone suggests otherwise, let me clarify that her intentions are purely platonic. She's also significantly younger than me, which makes anything beyond friendship inappropriate. It's indeed a strong friendship, one that has been a great support recently. I also want to mention that I went to the doctor and got tested. I'm expecting the results this Monday. Additionally, I've reached out to Jay's fiancée a few times, just to see how she's handling everything. She told me she's coping but feels uncertain about what to do next. I offered to meet up anytime next week if she needs to vent or just talk. I'm more than happy to listen. For anyone else going through similar challenges, my advice is to stay focused on what you really want, whether that's pursuing a divorce or reconciliation. Set your goals step by step, lawyer, doctor, and notifying close ones, and keep personal matters off the internet where possible. Also, make sure to set aside time to process your feelings. Update asterisk hello everyone. It's been a while, but I thought I'd share some new developments. I shared how Wendy came over and stayed for a few days before I headed to my cabin for some hunting. I have good news from the trip. I bagged an 8-pointer on my first day out, which I'm really pleased about. It gave me the rest of the weekend to enjoy some fishing. I caught 2 decent-sized fish, cooked one for dinner, and butchered the other. I spent the rest of my days at the cabin cleaning my deer and soaking in the tranquility of nature. Aside from a drink or two each day, I kept my promise to stay mostly sober, moving past the initial week of heavy drinking. Recently, I received a call from the doctor confirming that I'm all clear health-wise. While it wasn't a surprise, given that Linda and I hadn't been close in months, it's always a relief to have confirmation. I tried reaching out to Jay's fiancée but didn't hear back immediately. She eventually replied, letting me know she was staying with her family. She didn't share many details, but from her move, it's reasonable to assume things aren't going well. At least she's in a safe place with support. I reassured her that I was here to help if needed. She then asked to meet for coffee the next day, which I readily agreed to. We met again at the same quirky coffee shop and spent a couple of hours talking. She was curious about the steps I was taking regarding my divorce and whether there was any chance of reconciliation with Linda. I made it clear that for me, infidelity is a deal breaker. The sheer disregard and disrespect shown by cheating, especially over such a prolonged period, was unforgivable. She shared her confusion and heartbreak, unsure of her next steps, whether to move on or forgive Jay. She mentioned her family was encouraging her to forgive him and proceed with the wedding. I decided to be straightforward with her. Just because her family desired a particular path didn't mean it was right for her. Jay had demonstrated a clear disregard for the commitment of marriage by engaging in an affair with my wife. If that didn't clarify his unsuitability as a spouse, I wasn't sure what would. I encouraged her to prioritize her feelings and decisions over the expectations of others, emphasizing that the choice was hers alone to make. I advised Jay's fiancée to make her own decisions based on what would best suit her life. I shared how, upon discovering the affair, I had tried to find a way to forgive Linda, but ultimately, my heart and brain couldn't reconcile with the betrayal. I told her that while I had spoken to only one person about it, my decision was already made, and no one could change my mind. I suggested that perhaps when she went to stay with her family, she might have had a clear idea of what to do. But letting too many people weigh in could cloud her judgment. I concluded by advising her to trust her instincts. Often, our brains and hearts can deceive us, but our gut usually points us in the right direction. She thanked me for the advice, and we parted ways. The next day, I received a message from my lawyer informing me that Linda had been successfully served with divorce papers at work. I expressed my gratitude for his efficiency. Shortly after, Wendy called to tell me Linda had been in her room all day crying. I explained that Linda had been served and was likely coming to terms with the consequences of her actions. Wendy and I briefly discussed my time at the cabin and the things I had done there. Then we ended the call. I then braced myself for Linda's reaction, assuming she might confront me now that she had been served. I prepared for a potential outburst, keeping some Advil ready for the headache I anticipated. I even arranged for a friend to come over as a witness if needed, in case things escalated. I am waiting somewhat anxiously for what I've half-jokingly dubbed Hurricane M to hit. If or when it does, I'll be sure to update you all. Cameras have been up inside and outside the house since we moved in. My lawyer said there's not much he or I can do as it's also her house. I also can't pull any money out of our shared account until the divorce is finalized. Update asterisk hello again, everyone. Quite a bit has happened after contacting everyone close to us, my friends, my father, and her family. I reached out to her affair partner's fiancé, sharing everything. I could prove she, too, was served with papers at her workplace 2 days ago. Now you're fully up to date. About an hour after my last post, I was anticipating Linda's arrival at the house, expecting her to be furious given everything that had unfolded. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect from her anymore. I checked all the security cameras, both inside and outside, to ensure they were functioning correctly. I also phoned my friend, informing him that Linda had been served today and requesting his presence at my house as soon as possible if she showed up. I wasn't about to face any legal complications alone. True to my expectations, Linda showed up, banging on the door and screaming to be let in. She was hurling insults, calling me heartless, among other things. Ironically, all I could do was laugh. It was either that or scream back. Curiously, she didn't use her keys to enter, which she still had to my knowledge. When my friend arrived, he started recording the scene on his phone from his truck. Unfortunately, he brought his wife along, who tried to intervene and calm Linda down. This only escalated things when Linda slapped her across the face, yelling at her to stay out of it. At this point, my friend, now with video evidence of the assault, called the police. Linda continued her tirade until the police arrived. She then attempted to play the victim, tearfully telling one of the officers that I had hit her and thrown her out. Meanwhile, my friend and his wife explained to the other officer that they'd witnessed her aggressive behavior from the moment they arrived. Unable to verify Linda's claims, the officers were at a standoff. When the officers approached me, Linda pointed at me, accusing me of hitting her. As one officer began to handcuff me, I insisted that I could prove my innocence with the security camera footage. After reviewing the footage from the outdoor cameras, the officer apologized for the misunderstanding and acknowledged their initial bias. The situation concluded with Linda being arrested and charged with disturbing the peace, public intoxication, and driving under the influence. As the police escorted her to their car, Wendy arrived, puzzled and concerned. I showed her the video on my phone, explaining what had transpired. An officer then provided me with the case number and other relevant documents. Wendy began asking about the specifics of the charges, trying to grasp the full scope of the night's events. After the chaotic events, Wendy and I retreated back inside. She explained that she had only left her house for about 10 minutes to run to the store, and when she returned, Linda was no longer in the living room. Assuming Linda had gone to bed after drinking too much wine, Wendy was initially unaware of the subsequent drama until she found Linda causing a scene at my door. After discussing the night's events, Wendy asked if she could stay over, and I assured her she was welcome anytime. She mentioned that Linda would have to spend the night in jail and wouldn't be eligible for bail until the morning. Wendy had called her parents to inform them of the situation and to explore if they could arrange bail, as she didn't have the funds herself. We shared a beer and then turned in for the night. The next morning, Wendy had already left to meet with her parents. I haven't heard from Linda, Wendy, or their parents since, and I doubt their conversations have been pleasant. Hopefully, Linda managed to cool off while in jail. Update asterisk the next morning, Wendy was gone before I woke up. Since then, I haven't heard from Linda directly, but her lawyer has contacted mine, indicating they are ready to proceed with the divorce. I also reached out to Jay's fiancée to see if there were any developments on her end. We exchanged a few texts, but nothing substantial has unfolded there yet. Jay's fiancée told me she has kicked him out of her house. Her father and brother helped pack up all his belongings and drop them off at his place. She mentioned that her dad and brother were tempted to confront him physically, but she persuaded them against it, expressing her desire to move past the ordeal and start anew. She thanked me for my support and mentioned that her close friends were there for her. On Friday, right after work, I hurried home with plans to head back to my cabin for the weekend. When I arrived, Wendy was waiting in my driveway. She wanted to collect some of Linda's belongings, having a list of items Linda expected to be ready. I had already packed almost everything, with items boxed or placed in the garage. I made it clear I wouldn't transport or handle the items directly to avoid any claims of damage from Linda. I offered to hire a moving company to manage everything, as I was heading to my cabin and didn't want to deal with any more of Linda's issues. Wendy appreciated the gesture and wished me a good trip. She took a box of Linda's clothes and placed it in her car, then asked if she could join me at the cabin. I agreed, suggesting she drop off the box at her place and pack a bag. By the time I finished my errands and packed the truck, Wendy was ready. We locked up my house and set off for the cabin. The weekend was rejuvenating. The cabin's secluded location and beautiful views offered a perfect escape from everything. On Monday, I called a moving company, and by Tuesday, 3 movers arrived with a large truck. I meticulously recorded each item as it was boxed and loaded, taking photos of all the furniture. I thanked the movers for their patience and tipped each of them an extra $50. I sent all the documentation to my lawyer to ensure everything was accounted for. Now, the house feels empty but cleaner without Linda's things. Initially, my lawyer advised keeping any shared possessions, so I stored most of the furniture in a storage unit. I've been sleeping in the guest room since Linda left and have started buying new furniture, storing the majority of it in the now available garage space. I've decided not to keep the house, even if I win it in the divorce. It holds too many painful memories. Update. I've been busy coaching high school baseball, handling the divorce, and dealing with everything surrounding my soon-to-be ex, which hasn't left much free time. A lot has happened, so this update might be lengthy. I meticulously documented the moving process to ensure Linda couldn't claim I had damaged any of her possessions and sent all documentation to my lawyer. A few days after the movers took Linda's belongings, my lawyer received a claim from hers accusing me of damaging items and demanding $1,500 in compensation, or she would take me to court. My lawyer responded by sending all the videos and pictures, asking her lawyer to specify the alleged damages. He assured me that this would demonstrate to any judge how unreasonable she was being and that, although it might be a headache now, it would serve as perfect evidence in court. He commented on how unprepared her lawyer seemed for the level of detail in my documentation. Ever since discovering Linda's affair, I had immersed myself in reading similar experiences online, determined not to become another victim of postmarital vengeance. I prepared meticulously for any possible accusation she could throw my way, refusing to leave any stone unturned. Linda occasionally called, but I never answered. If she left a voicemail, I wouldn't listen but directly forwarded it to my lawyer. He often joked that I was a lawyer's dream client due to my thoroughness and compliance with his advice, a comment that always reassured and someone cheered me up amid the turmoil. About 3 weeks ago, my lawyer indicated that we had compiled enough evidence to potentially settle the matter out of court, or at least show our willingness to resolve matters amicably, which would reflect well on us if we did end up in court. We set a meeting in a neutral lawyer's office. Before the meeting, he advised me to remain calm and unreactive to anything Linda might say, reminding me that everything discussed could be recorded and might be reviewed by a judge later. We arrived early in the morning for this crucial meeting. To my surprise, Linda was already there with her lawyer when we arrived. As the lawyers exchanged greetings, Linda and I sat in silence, bracing for what was about to unfold. Her lawyer initiated the discussion by inquiring about our settlement offer. My lawyer, confidently aware of the evidence we held, responded that the only things Linda would receive were half the selling price of the home and half of the savings account. Essentially, she would leave the marriage with what she had brought into it. He then sternly warned that if the case went to court, he would expose every detail of her infidelity and inappropriate behavior, including making her read out every incriminating message and describe every photo in court, on top of showcasing the video of her recent charges. Linda, visibly shaken by these remarks, looked at me with tearful eyes, pleading if there was anything she could do to rectify the situation. I told her plainly that the evidence suggested she had been unfaithful since before our wedding and that there was nothing she could do to make amends. I urged her to sign the settlement papers, emphasizing that it was more than fair considering her actions. After a prolonged emotional outburst, which saw her excusing herself to the restroom, Linda returned, still in tears, but signed the papers. With that, our marriage was effectively over, pending the official processing of the divorce papers and the sale of the house. For those who are curious, my relationship with Wendy remains platonic but supportive, a valuable friendship during these tumultuous times.